coming out on this Veterans Day. If we could take a moment to honor our veterans with just a moment of silence and our gratitude. So thank you. I also have a little bit of business to get out of the way. One is that
it's people online want to see you.
oh, I thought they could see me there. Oh, that's okay. I can stand over here. Okay, we can. I'll stand over here. So the other thing, another piece of business I need to discuss is that we need some volunteers for our voter registration. In December, the December new citizen ceremonies at Harrah's. We are short on voter registration volunteers, so I know that we're all very busy. I don't have the date, but they're in the volunteer opportunity section of the website. So please go and look. We're short on volunteers for voter registration. We need to get back in the swing of going to do regular voter registrations, please. That's what we are famous for. Then the other thing I would like to mention is that there is a celebration of life for Mary Lindsay, and that's been scheduled for December 2nd at 11 o'clock at All Souls Universal Unitarian, I believe. There will be details will go out on Tuesday morning at 6 o'clock. It's the off week for our e-voter, so we're going to send it out at the time when you might be looking for an e-voter if you forgot which week it was. So look for that. There'll be details in that email for you on Tuesday. And now I want to introduce Riva, who you all know, lots of you know, and Riva will talk about our program for today.
Do you want me to stand in front of here too?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh boy, I can barely. I'm like here.
Might be able to slow it forward, you're down.
I look
Yeah,
like
there you go.
I'm decapitated.
Perfect.
Well, thank you everyone for being here and the library and, oh, I just moved, didn't I? Okay, I could try to watch myself. And for the library for hosting us, for Greg and Janine, who are tech people today. I'm not going to speak a lot. The Legislative Action Committee is a relatively new committee. And our primary job is really to let our members know what bills are moving through the legislative process, because we have to remember these bills are, they become law, and those are the laws that we have to live by. So it's really important to pay attention to what's going on in our legislature. So we're trying to keep everybody alerted to those bills, and so we have trackers. So we have a leadership team, and that includes Melanie, who is our chair, and I'm the co-chair, and Greg, and also Anne. The four of us are kind of the administrative committee. We have two main groups. We have the turnaround team and we have the trackers, and the trackers are really the heart of our committee. So thank you for those trackers. We have several here in the room, and we basically track bills, and we pretty much focus on those issues that the league supports or doesn't support, but that are important to the league. And so they track and they alert us to any bills that are moving that we should be concerned about, either for or against, support or oppose. And then they send us this information. The turnaround team is what we do. We turn around that information, we put it into an alert, and it goes out in the newsletter, the alert newsletter, the legislative action letter on Sundays. And I think we're still keeping those dates. I know the timing is tough. People think, gosh, Sunday, we have to write our legislators by Monday morning. But unfortunately, that's the calendar. That's how they work. So we're constantly improving, hopefully, process. We have someone here who's going to talk about advocacy, so I'm not even going to go there, but I really will hope this inspires those of you here and also out there in Zoom land who would like to be part of our committee if you are not. And if you have questions about what we do and how we do it, you can ask those four of us that are here today, or we have trackers. Could you raise your hand if you're a tracker? We have Elizabeth, you're a tracker. Yeah, you are. Elizabeth's a tracker and Laura's a tracker. So if you want to know more about what it means to be a tracker, you can talk to them, because we really need more and more people. We last year opened up this committee to the whole state. We kind of designed this process, and the whole state is now part of it. So we're getting everybody from the whole state. So that's pretty much what we do. And again, we'd like to thank Mary Lindsay, who is obviously not here, but she was a huge component of our committee and was very passionately involved with it. And we miss her dearly. So we're trying to keep going and remember her passion for this, so that it will keep us going when we get it. I'll tell you, it's a frustrating job sometimes. And that's a kind word, frustrating. It can be very stressful. We work primarily from January to May, but we start looking at the bills in December. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Melanie, and she's going to introduce our speaker today.
Stand in front. Okay. When you get on the mic, just hold the mic about 2 inches away, not that close. Yep.
Okay, I am happy to introduce our speaker, but I just have to tell you that it took both Reva and I, co-chairs, to fill the position of Mary of Y. So, all right, I'm excited to introduce our speaker today, Sharon Geuez. I think I did it right, Jones, an advocate and licensed attorney in Missouri, uses her 2 decades of nonprofit association experience to advocate for individual rights, government transparency, and corporate accountability. In 2019, she founded the Jones Advocacy Group. Her team combines nonprofit legal support, lobbying, communications, and membership management skills to provide a robust and customizable suite of services to their clients. The Jones Advocacy Group's mission is to help make government transparency and accountability a reality by guiding clients through the legislative, judicial, and regulatory systems. As we go through, those in the chat room, please share your questions. Those in the room, we're going to have some white index cards we'll pass out, and we're going to save all the questions to the end. I told Sharon she could talk basically as long as she wants to, but we will want to save room for questions and answers. Oh, we do have a training scheduled for Saturday, December 16th at the Waldo Library, starting at 10. And we will also schedule several Zoom meetings at different times throughout the day, one in the evening, one during the day, for those that can't attend those other meetings. Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you. I'm just gonna.
There we go.
Thanks. I'm so glad to be here today. The League of Women Voters is a huge part of the work that I do with Missouri Voter Protection Coalition, and with the actual election day protection. So really happy to get to talk to all of you. I've met many of you either in the Capitol or over Zoom. So this is really exciting. As a disclaimer, today I'm going to be talking about how I work. How I work is not how everyone works. And I hope that no one gets offended or thinks that I am disparaging the way other people do their job. But I am here today to share insights with you from my experience. So take it for what it's worth. And, you know, I had a teacher once who said, my job is not to make you like me. So take what I tell you that is useful to you and leave what isn't. So that's my disclaimer as we go through today. Okay. The arrow doesn't like me. Clicking? Clicking likes me. Okay. So today I'm not doing my normal training. I do trainings all the time that talk just about how to write your legislators, how to be in the Capitol. You all don't need that. You are past that point. You know how to do that. So today we're going to talk more about getting to a point where you can push through the static. Legislators hear from people all the time. You all have been to lobby days. You know how big they can get. So we're really focusing on getting through that, getting to a point where you are talking to your legislator and influencing their action, not just communicating as part of a larger crowd. I gotta remember to stop doing that. Okay, so there are multiple levels of contact that legislators get. The very base level is the constituent contact. I have chosen today to represent that as a string of paper dolls. These constituent contacts aren't completely useless, but they are very ignorable. They get a lot of them. They are usually form letters. A lot of times it just turns into a tally sheet on a whiteboard. They aren't meaningful contacts in a way that will influence a legislator's action, especially if that legislator has already made up their mind. So good, not great. Then you get to the activist level. And activists are more influential. They tend to be people who know what they're talking about. They tend to contact the same legislators repeatedly, that kind of thing. They also generally are working in an organized fashion, not just scattershot the way that constituent contact is. So that is a little more influential. And it's probably where most of the people in this room are going to find themselves, is in that activist level. You know what you're talking about, you do it frequently, you can come down and testify, but you're not friendly necessarily with legislators. The next step up, this is my friend Wimmy. Wimmy and I went to college together. We are still connected on Facebook, and we still contact each other a couple times a year about different things. If Wimmy came to me and said, Sharon, I know that you drive a Dodge, but I have learned information about Dodge, and I am asking you as a friend of mine to never drive a Dodge car again. I would be like, okay, well, I'm not going to go get rid of my car tomorrow, but the next time I buy a car, I'm going to take that into consideration. I'm probably not going to buy a Dodge, because my friend, who I know personally, even though we aren't, going over to each other's house for dinner every day, asked me not to. And that's going to influence my action. Then you've got me, right? Professional lobbyists. We are there day in and day out talking to legislators. We are in their face. They literally cannot walk through the Capitol without seeing us. So we have a different kind of influence, but it's still a great influence on them. We are often talking to them, especially if you're a contract lobbyist, you're talking to them about a whole bunch of different issues, not just the same issue over and over, but you're building a relationship where they trust you. And these two levels, notice two things. One, they actually have faces. These two don't. The other thing is, these two don't just talk about legislation, right? Does anyone, she's on the other side of the state, so you might not. Does anyone know Paula Brown? She's a state representative out of St. Louis County, retired teacher. She calls me regularly when they're not in session to talk about the EPA, because she's got an issue in her district. She called me one time because she had a legal question about one of her constituents. These are not things that I work on. These are things she's calling me about because she respects my ability to figure out the answers to things, right? We've got a different kind of relationship. If you are here right now, if you're an activist, you have influence. You're doing a good job. If you want to get to this point, that's one of the things that I want to talk about today. You don't need to be all the way over here. You don't need to be me in the Capitol every single day. But if you can go from being an activist to being a key contact, you will find that your ability to influence legislation increases dramatically. And it's not actually that hard, and it's not that unpleasant. It just takes a little bit of work. So let's talk about what kinds of people fit into those. I took away my slide. The two categories of activists and key contacts. So activists, again, community leaders. Am I?
No, you're good.
Okay.
I'm just gonna minimize the bar down here.
Community leaders, organizational leaders, topic area experts, local elected officials. I hope that you're seeing yourself in that list. Are there some other, we're gonna do a little bit of interaction. It's not scary, I promise. What are some other people that kind of fall into that category? Yeah.
Possibly churches?
Yes, religious leaders.
organizations?
Absolutely. Yeah. Or some others that might be activists that you think of?
Civic groups.
Yeah. Yeah, civic groups, Boys and Girls Club, YMCA, some of that would definitely fall into the activists. The arts, the KC Arts League might fall into that. These are folks who know what they're talking about, right? So then we look at key contacts. Here we go, friends and family, personal acquaintances, professional colleagues, but also local business leaders and local elected officials. They could be in either one, right? The other key contacts.
Major donors.
Major donors. Absolutely they are. Absolutely they are. There's some others. Yeah. So I wouldn't include media in this, but if you've got, it's a different kind of influence in my mind. But they would probably be more on the activist advocate side than the key contact side, depending on who they are in the media and whether they've got a relationship there. Any other thoughts? Oh, yeah, educators, absolutely. Especially if you're talking about like local superintendents, they're probably over here in key contacts. The local school superintendents are in contact with their legislators pretty regularly. Teachers are definitely in the activist advocate side. Some of them are in the key contact side. How about this? How about the teacher of the representative's children?
Oh, key contact.
Key contact, that's right. That's right. So I feel like we've got a pretty decent grasp of these categories. Here's the question that if you want to answer out loud, you can, and if not, please write down. Which of these roles do you see yourself in? You know, are you a professional colleague with someone who's elected? Do you, if you're not professional colleagues, were you in the same industry? Yeah.
How about neighborhood?
Yeah, neighborhood associations.
I just ran into my
Yes.
state senator at a neighborhood event.
Yes.
I talked with him.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely neighborhood associations. And again, like these are kind of blurry, right? So neighborhood association, right now you may be over here, but you can get over here pretty
But
easy.
he recognized it when I said,
Yeah.
I'm from the League of Women Voters. He goes,
Yeah.
oh, am I doing a good job? I mean, so, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right.
Okay.
Neighborhood association is a perfect example of this. And if you are on the board of your neighborhood association, so much the better, because now he really has to listen to you. So now you're really over here in key contacts. You tell him his color beige is wrong. Yeah. So donors are usually key contacts, depending on where they are. But they are one of these two, right? So if you are a $100 donor, you're probably closer to this end, where they kind of know your name, but they don't really know who you are. If you're someone who regularly maxes out and gives to the PAC, you're over here. And if you are in an organization that's giving, even if they don't recognize your face, they're gonna know your name, right? So if you are, for example, one of my clients is the Missouri Association of Trial Attorneys. We're folks who represent individuals who've been harmed, right? So consumer attorneys is sometimes what we're called. We do a lot of PAC work, right? So when I go into a meeting and I say, hey, I'm Sharon with the trial attorneys, now I'm kind of over here. You were gonna say something.
Yeah, a question online. When you talk to a legislator about an issue, do you identify a group by name who is employing or paying for your engagement? And do you represent their position on this issue? And I think you just
Yeah, so I rarely have a conversation unless it's like what I was talking about with Representative Brown, where it's not about one of my clients. I come in and I will say, hey, I want to talk to you today about an issue for dream.org, which is a criminal justice organization. Or I want to talk to you today about this bill on behalf of NAACP or whatever it is. I always identify the client that I am there on behalf of. And this is an aside, but I am very careful when I take on new clients to make sure I'm not going to have a conflict of interest. And if there is ever a bill that I think people may feel differently about, I go and talk to both of those clients about it. And if we can't get on the same page, I just say, I'm not working on that bill, or I'm not working on that issue. I do that for two reasons. One, I'm also an attorney, so I can end up having conflict of interest, ethical problems down the road. Also, I am a moral person, and so I don't want to have conflict of interest and ethical problems ever. And you know, not everyone operates that way, but I have a pretty strict standard. Yeah.
Put the League of Women Voters in this, these two things.
So the question is, where would I put the League of Women
Because
Voters?
it's not donors.
You're not, but you are a recognizable organization. You are. And you have a lot of influence. And one of the things that I would say, to tighten up your testimony and to make it more impactful, because every single one of you come in and you do a very good job of saying, I'm here today on behalf of the League of Women Voters, saying something like, we have 5,000 members around the state, or we have, you know, several hundred members in our local chapter, would add to that, because that means you're not just you, you're an entire organization. Yeah. Is anyone here well, I know we've got some retired teachers, right? A huge number of legislators are retired teachers.
Oh.
Huge number. A lot of legislators are retired business owners or still actively own a business. Is anyone in here entrepreneur, business owner? Yeah. We've got some engineers, if anyone's got a background in engineering. We've got lawyers, if you've got a background in lawyering. Is that what we call it? But you know, you can, when we say professional colleague, part of that is knowing the legislator's background and being able to have that common background, even if you don't actively work together. So before we move on, again, the key here is right now, I feel like most of you are here. So make sure you're here and do that by emphasizing your connections. And today we're going to work on getting to here, to building those relationships. Yes.
Can you talk a little bit, as we go through this, about the difference when you represent an organization between educating that legislator on what you want them to hear versus lobbying?
Okay. The question was, talk about the difference between education and lobbying. The answer is there is no difference.
Okay. So anytime you lobby, you can call it education.
Right. The difference, yes, the difference between being an,
501c3, that's so much
right,
area.
correct.
Okay. Right.
So the difference between what is legally considered a lobbying activity and what is legally considered issue education is different than the issue of what is lobbying and what is education. Because the real answer here is anytime you are advocating for or against the passage of something, you are lobbying. And anytime you are down in the legislature talking about an issue that is before the legislature, you are lobbying. Now, when do you have to register as a lobbyist and when does it count against your 501c3 status? That is a different question. The answer to that question is you cannot ask for a vote or an official action if you don't want to be lobbied. So you can come down and say, I want to talk to you about the IP process. I was involved in it. I want to tell you about my experience and why I think that we are currently fine in the way we do it and it's already hard, or whatever that messaging point is. You can talk about that for hours and hours and hours. You cannot say, please vote no. You cannot say, I would like for you to not hear that bill. You cannot say, I would like for you to do anything that is an official action on that bill if you don't want to be caught lobbying. You don't have to register as a lobbyist until you are down there asking for official action in a regular way. And in fact, does anyone here know Ron Calzone? Does that name ring bells? He is a very interesting character. He is not a lobbyist. He has gone to court to prove that he is not a lobbyist. He has a grassroots organization that he volunteers for and created called something. It's one of those where it's like all the good buzzwords, so you think it's a really good group. He is incredibly conservative, but in a libertarian bent, so he's like, stay out of my business all the time. He is not considered a lobbyist, even though he is down there on behalf of an organization because he is not paid. And he argued that because he is not paid and because no one who joins his organization has to pay dues, he is actually just a citizen advocate. I know you've all seen, anyone who's been to the Capitol has seen Arnie Derhoff, the guy in the hat who gets up and says, I'm a citizen advocate.
Oh,
Both of them probably should be registered as lobbyists under the strict definition of the law. But again, Ron Calzone went to court and the court said, First Amendment, you don't have to register, go for it, because he's not paid. So again, I tend to err on the side of, I don't ever want to be in an orange jumpsuit because I don't look good in orange. Yeah,
So she mentioned education, so we're talking education concerns that we might have.
education,
Thoughts we might
concerns
have.
you have, thoughts you have, as long as you do not ask for an official action to be taken, it is not lobbying. Yes.
I have often, and I know when the league puts out their newsletters, we will say, using IP for example, we are against this bill.
Mhm.
I have said in my testimony, please vote no
Yeah.
on this bill. Is that, I'm not paid though.
So
I'm not representing the league. I am representing me, Elizabeth Franklin.
Right.
But does that, I don't want to cross that line either.
you're fine. You can totally cross that line, is my point.
Okay.
So the 501c3 rule says 20% is the limit on what you can spend, and it cannot be
20% of what?
20% of your budget. Money,
Oh. But if I'm not accepting money from anybody.
correct. If you're not accepting money,
We can ask them
Right.
to vote no on this terrible bill.
right, so you can ask them to vote no on the terrible bill. If the rule is 20% of your budget
Okay.
or a substantial portion of your activity.
Okay.
The League of Women Voters' primary activity is voter registration and education. It is not advocacy and lobbying. So as long as you are not being paid or in any way compensated to come down, you don't ever have to worry about it. If you are compensating people to come down, you need to keep track of that and make sure it's not more than 20% of your annual budget. People are terrified of lobbying, and I don't know why they're worried about it, except just the perception. Every single one of you could lobby, and it's not a problem, as long as you are doing lobbying activity on your own or on behalf of the league unpaid, or it never becomes a substantial portion of the league's activity. So I think what I'm trying to communicate is don't be afraid of that distinction between education and lobbying. Focus on making sure that when you are down, you know whether you're representing the league or yourself. And if you are representing the league, you report that back to league leadership, so someone is keeping track of what's happening. If that makes sense. And I am happy to talk about that in great depth and detail because I work with a lot of C3, C4 organizations that have both, and they have to figure that out. But that's a different topic for a different day and probably deserves hours of attention, not 5 minutes. Okay, so moving on. When you do contact people, right? I made an acronym. Are you proud of me? Tang. I tried to make it tangy, but I couldn't think of a word that started with Y. Tangu? Oh, you. Yeah, I know, but I've already done that here. It's fine. It took 3 brains and we still couldn't figure it out. So we're just going with Tang and we're just gonna say, keep it tangy. Or something. So this is about how you have an impactful message, right? We'll get back to where you are in a minute. So let's talk about what your message needs to look like. A lot of you are doing this already, so let's talk about refining it, right? Because you know how to write legislators, you know how to write op-eds, you know how to testify. This is more than that. So starting with timely, are you contacting them at the right time? If you contact a legislator on December 2nd about a bill that has been, for example, filed by a Democrat in the House, they aren't going to hear your message because they don't care about that. They are months away from potentially hearing it. They're looking at the sponsor and saying, this sponsor probably isn't going to get a hearing at all. They're just not concerned about that bill. Your message isn't going to penetrate. You got to wait until it's real for them. On the other hand, if you're talking about, say, Mike Searboy, right, who's an elder senator, who's got the attention of leadership, and he's got a bill, and you're contacting him about one of the first 3 bills he filed, he's going to hear that message. Because in the Senate, the first 3 bills you file are guaranteed a hearing. And the Senate gets everything filed in order of seniority. So if you see a bill that is Senate Bill 1, that bill has been filed by an elder statesman and is definitely going to get a hearing. And it's probably going to be one of the first hearings. And it's one of that particular senator's top 3 priorities. So make sure you're thinking that way. When I say timely, I'm not saying, is it 24 hours of the hearing? I'm saying, do you know where that bill is in the process? Do you know its likelihood of passage? Are you waiting until the message is going to be heard? I'm going to tell a story on someone. And it comes from a place of, remember, it was April and I was very angry and frustrated at the whole world. So there is a group of folks who are very concerned about protester rights, First Amendment issues. They were very concerned because 2 years ago, there was a bill filed that would have dramatically increased penalties for unlawful assembly. And there was another bill filed that would have given immunity to people who drove through crowds of protesters. Both these bills are incredibly bad. I'm not saying they're not bad. They're incredibly, incredibly bad. Beginning of April, like April 5th, maybe, I get an email from them. Sharon, we need your help. These bills have been filed and we haven't done anything about them all year. And I'm like, yeah, I know. So I'm like, yeah, they're on all of my tracking. If those folks had looked at any of the tracking lists that I send out that are publicly available, they would have seen they're on the tracking. Neither one had been referred to committee. And it's the beginning of April. And so I probably was sharper than I needed to be. We've all been there. But I sent them back an email and tried to have some compassion. And I said, I understand these are bad bills. Please know they are on my list and on my radar. If you actually want to do something to help people's First Amendment rights, here's a bill that would allow people to conceal carry in churches. Can you please contact your legislators about it? Because it's passed the House and has a hearing next week in the Senate. So when I say timely, that's what I'm talking about. Accurate. Are you providing accurate information? Are you reading the most recent version of the bill, or are you talking about something that's already been taken out of it? Are you being truthful in the examples that you're providing and then the data you're providing and that sort of thing. It's very, very important that when you call the legislator, they aren't able to dismiss what you're saying by saying, well, the bill doesn't do that anymore, or whatever. So it's more than just don't lie. It's make sure that they can't dismiss you because you are out of touch with what's happening. Next, are you telling a story? I feel like I'm in a room full of like-minded souls. I love stats. I love data. I love statistics. I want to know what happened in all the other 50 states, but don't just tell me, give me their actual like references and citations and I'm a data person. Most people are not. So even if you've got all the data, start with a story, make it a story. So the story can be, did you know Missouri is the only state left in the nation that allows a judge to make a death penalty decision? That's a story. And that gets people's attention. And now we can move into, here are people who have actually been sentenced by a judge, not a jury, in Missouri. Here are statistics on recidivism related to death penalty issues. Here are So start with the story and then give them more details. And cater the amount of details to the legislator you're talking to. So some people are going to want everything I just talked about. Other people aren't. Other people are going to say, I just need the top line. I don't, or I'm already with you. I don't need to hear everything. Or I'm with you and I want to stand on the floor and hold the floor against this bill. So I need not just everything you said, but so much more. Give me every newspaper article ever written so I can stand there and read them. So start with the story, follow up, catered to the legislator, and then ground it. Are you asking for the right action? Is what you're asking for reasonable given the circumstances? One of the issues I worked on last year was healthcare for trans youth. When I'm talking to Mike Moon, I'm not asking him to vote no on the bill. That's unreasonable. I am saying, hey, when you have this hearing, can you please not say things that are offensive and dismissive to the people in the room? When I'm talking to Alex Riley, who's the chair of the House committee who heard the bill, I'm not saying, well, first I said, can you please not hear the bill? And he was like, you know, I can't. So I said, okay, fine. When we have the hearing, can we put up guardrails and safeguards and do these things to make sure that the hearing is not more traumatic than it needs to be? When I talk to Dean Clocker about death penalty issues, I say, hey, would you please just refer this? I'm not asking you to push it, but can you please refer the bill to a committee? Here's a committee that I'd like it to go to. He may say no, he may say yes, but that ask is tailored to his position on the bill, his role in the legislature, and it's something that he could say yes to, even if he's not with us on the bill overall. Does that make sense? Yeah. And that takes a little bit of sophistication, which again is why this is beyond how you write a letter to your legislator. You don't need that. You need to figure out, how do I make it the next step better? Yeah.
So just thinking about what you just said, are you making legislators then less offensive and more sophisticated so that these things become more palatable for the middle? Do you know what I mean?
I understand.
Like,
yeah.
when they are so offensive, then the middle might say, that's not right.
So the question is, when I ask them to do these things, am I actually being counterproductive and making it more palatable for folks? I don't think so, because they're still going to be offensive, right? Like, I'm not saying, please don't misgender people. I'm saying, can you please not use this slur? So I hear what you're saying, and it is a balance. You have to decide in those moments, what is the harm that will be done if I let them go and say whatever they want to say? And for that particular issue, there are small children listening. And the harm that will be done to them is greater than the potential for him to seem not quite as bad as a person. But that's a fair question, and it's definitely part of the discussion and the calculation when you do that kind of thing. It also depends, in that particular instance, we knew there was a high likelihood that the bill would pass. Right, and it did pass. So it wasn't a matter of we're within 5 votes of killing it. So how do I make sure I get those 5 people to come over to my side by thinking I don't want to be affiliated with this man? We knew it was going to be a partisan vote with a couple of flips. All that goes into that calculation. And I didn't make it by myself in the closet, right? You know, like it's a huge organizational discussion about how we do that. Yeah.
Did he abide by that?
Did he abide by that? He did. He was still offensive. He was still very clearly dismissive of the kids, but he did not use the worst of the worst slurs that we were concerned about. Yeah. And that goes to, you know, what I'm going to talk about next, I think, which is building the relationship. Mike Moon and I are technically key contacts. We grew up in the same faith tradition in the same town in Springfield, Missouri. We know all the same faith leaders. He went to high school with my mother. Like, we know each other. We have a relationship. We can speak to each other civilly because we're both adults, mostly. We will never agree on anything. About the only thing we agree on is that the civil court should be open to people who've been injured. I have had discussions with him that I leave and think, I need to call my mother. I need an alcoholic beverage. I need ice cream and a shower and then a nap. I mean, but I still have those conversations and I still find ways to connect and I still find issues, narrow though they may be, where we can agree because he will still be there the next year and the next. I don't let the constituents who are coming to the Capitol for Lobby Day be a part of those conversations. And that's why we have the different levels, right? That's why we're talking about activists, key contacts, and professional lobbyists. You have to know what you're getting into before you go in that room to have that conversation. So let's talk about methods of impact, or any other questions about how you frame a next level message, if we can call it that. Okay.
So one
Yeah.
comment online, from a member is that members of the league would be speaking as individual citizens, not representing the league.
Yeah. And I think that's how most of you frame your testimony. And that, as long as you don't mention League of Women Voters doesn't have to worry about their C3 status. And again, happy to talk more about that. I think I used to have a memo. I may still have it, if somebody wants it. Okay. Methods of impact. So here we go again with my little levels, right? Starting with emails. I am a 0 email inbox person. Is anyone else a 0 inbox person? Love my 0 inbox people. My husband who I love and have been with since I was 19 years of age. Probably never gonna leave. Has 40,000 unread emails.
Oh,
And every time I see his phone screen, I die a little inside. Most legislators are closer to my husband than they are to me. They get thousands of emails a day. If they don't know your email is coming, they aren't likely to read it. If it's from a constituent, a intern will probably read it and put it on the tally sheet. If it is from a constituent and has the exact same subject line as 10 other emails they've gotten, they're not even going to open it to put it on the tally sheet. They're just going to say that's clearly a form email, it's part of an action alert. Dismiss. But if they know it's coming, so yesterday I was sending around the criminal justice package that we're working on this year. I texted each representative before I sent it and said, hey, I'm getting ready to send you an email. Will you please open it? Or I've got their personal email, not their official email, and send it there instead. So if you're going to send an email, make sure it's as a follow-up. Or you've got a high enough level relationship with that legislator that if they see your name, they're going to open that email. Phone calls are better, but unless you're lucky or have a cell phone number, you're likely to talk to staff. Staff are incredibly useful and informed and should never be dismissed. They don't actually cast the vote though. So phone calls are a little bit better. You're gonna definitely get put on the list as someone who called. Patch through robocalls, however, don't work. All they do is make staffers angry. They make legislators angry. They do not work. They are useful only in the sense of internal organizational power. So if you are using form emails and robocalls as a way to get information, so you've got a larger mailing list, so you can do more public information and registration and things like that, they're useful tools for that kind of organizational work and grassroots power building. They are not useful for changing a legislator's mind. Again, unless they're part of a high-level relationship and follow-up, which robocalls and action alerts really aren't. However, the caveat I will give to that is action alerts coming from a group like MOVPC to organizational leaders as part of a coalition are different because they are not asking you to send a form email. They are asking you as activists and key contacts to make contact, right? So that's a difference there. I know we use the word action alert for both. When I say action alert, I'm talking about mass email to the thousands of people on an email list and saying, click this, and it automatically sends a letter to your legislator. Those are useful for things other than legislative advocacy. They don't change legislators' actions. Cards and letters. I love this. I am secretly an 80-year-old woman. I send handwritten thank you notes. I send handwritten thank you notes to every legislator at the end of session and after major contact. So if a legislator takes time to meet with my clients for the first time or after a lobby day or something like that, they're getting a handwritten letter from me or a handwritten card from me. I think we are in a day and age where that is so rare that anything you send through the physical mail is going to get noticed. It's going to have an attention level to it. If you do send a letter, make sure it's typed with a handwritten note at the bottom. Cards are one thing. Handwritten letters are usually coming from inmates. And in my experience, when legislators see a handwritten letter, they think it's prison mail. I don't think you should be dismissive of those letters, but in a real honest way, I think often they are. So I would type the letter, sign it, include whatever information you're going to do, But, sending things through the mail is going to get noticed. That includes if you want to do a larger action, say you wanted to say, instead of getting 5,000 emails, we're going to try to get 50 letters. That is a way to use some of that grassroots power that you've been building and actually get those sent in. Especially if people are willing to use your form letter and then write a note at the bottom. That is a really good way to do that. Because again, it's so rare that people get mail anymore. Then the very best, and this is again winning. This is what I spent most of my summer doing. In person, in district meetings. If you want to build a relationship, if you want to get someone to listen to you, during legislative session, you have 5 to 15 minutes. Outside of legislation, it's just unlimited. I thought I was going to have a 15-minute conversation with the state representative yesterday. An hour and a half later, she finally let me use the restroom. But only because like I'm sitting there going, well, I didn't have to go when I came in. And then I'm looking at the clock and I'm like, okay, I can make it an hour. I can make it an hour. And at the hour and a half mark, I finally go, you know what? I've got another meeting that I need to get to. So I'm really sorry, but like, this has been a great conversation. I really love it. We're going to send you what you need, follow up, da, 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 da. And Connor, who works with me, and I think most of you have seen on the calls, was in the room with me, and he's kind of looking at me, but he's a really good backup because he didn't say out loud, we don't have another meeting. What are you talking about? So we get outside in the hall and he's like, is everything okay? And her office was right next to the women's restroom. And I go, yeah, this is my next meeting. I'm just wait around the corner. I'll be there. That wouldn't happen during session, right? Because she'd have a hearing to go to or have to go vote on the floor, or I'm catching her in the rotunda and the bell's ringing and all this stuff. So doing those meetings that are relationship building meetings outside of the Capitol, in person, in district if possible, if not in district, at least when you're not in the middle of the rush. A lot of my time in January is spent doing in-district Capitol meetings, or not in-district, in-person Capitol meetings, because they haven't really started the big rush yet. They're not on the floor all the time. They're not running from committee to committee. So January is also a good time to do that. I like to do, I lost my train of thought. Oh, yeah. I like to do my first meeting with the new legislator as a what I call a no ask meeting. I'm not there to ask about anything. I'm not even necessarily there to talk about issues. I'm just there to meet them, figure out who they are, and make that connection. I also try to do at least one of those every couple of years with the legislators that I interact with regularly. John Patterson, the floor leader in the House, we're just now building a relationship, even though he's been there for a while. He is finally willing to start taking these meetings. So this summer, he was like, hey, I'm going to be in Columbia. That's where you live, right? Yeah, that's where I live. He goes, well, is there a good coffee shop? I've got all these fundraisers and stuff. Can I, like, where should I go? So I said, oh yeah, you should go to Alley A Coffee. And depending on what time you're going to be there, I'll come meet you. And we sat there for like half an hour and didn't talk about legislation. We just talked about, you know, he's used to be a surgeon. And I was like, so are you still going to practice medicine? Like, what's going on? Da, da, da. We talked about, you know, Mizzou. We talked about all these other things, just building that relationship, which you can do if it's in person in district. Or when I say in district, I mean, not in the Capitol. The other thing that I like to do is instead of giant lobby days, you know, this gets back to what is the purpose of what you're doing. Giant lobby days are really good for organizational building, and they're really good for public attention, and they are really good for press attention, and they are really good for making a lot of noise about an issue that maybe no one's paying attention to. Instead of doing that, I like to bring down 2 or 3 people once a week throughout the legislative session. So we can do these meetings. Because if you've got 6 people who haven't been immersed, you know, they're not on the legislative committee, they're not a tracker. They haven't been immersed in an issue. They're standing around in the hallway going, hello, Representative Lamb Love, thank you so much for your votes. We appreciate you. And she's like, oh, hi, yes, let's take a picture. Ah, great, lobby day, success. Instead, 2 or 3 people going, hey, Ashley, we need to talk to you about the language in this doula program. We need to make sure it's right because we think it doesn't include whatever. Or, hey, we really like this language. How can we help you? Let's sit down and talk about how we can help and work together. Different, right? Different goals, different impacts. But in person is the way you're going to get them to actually change their action. Yeah.
Absolutely. You mentioned some organizations have form letters that people can fill
Yeah.
out and personal out. How about if that form letter could be editable so that the person,
Yeah.
a member could actually go in and edit and make that form letter even more personal than just sending out the
Yeah.
exact form letter.
Yeah. The question was about form letters and do you do them as PDFs or editable
Right, an
documents?
editable document.
And I would say always send them as an editable document. That I think is better generally. However, I recognize that people have different levels of technology, familiarity, etc. So that may not always be possible, but if you can do that.
So going to discussions with the legislature. What do you think about the effectiveness of piggybacking on when the legislature or is in district having a meeting and saying, hey, can we talk to you after that? Or saying we can versus the organization going to the Capitol and talk to the legislature. What's the effectiveness of lenders?
Right. So the effectiveness of an in-district meeting versus in the Capitol
Right.
meeting. It depends on what you're trying to do. If you are trying to build that relationship, I think in district is better. If you are just trying to talk to them about a specific issue or bill, I think they're pretty equal, honestly. Especially if you're going at the beginning of legislative session before people are so rushed that they don't have time. You may notice that if you try to make an appointment with a legislator after about March 1st, the chances of it getting canceled are 80%. I don't even make appointments after March 1st. I'm like, I will just catch you. So if you're talking about January, February, versus in district, I think they're pretty equal if you're talking about a specific issue. Yeah. Now, after that March 1st date, if you can get to a coffee that they're having or something like Friday, Saturday, Sunday, that will be much more meaningful than trying to do it in the Capitol because you'll have more time. So, I'm sorry, the answer is it depends. Did I mention I'm a lawyer? All right, any questions about medium? Let's see, yes.
You mentioned in district, is it, I know this is kind of a gun question, it's good to go on the calendars. Do they have like their websites, like every legislature probably has a calendar that says where they're gonna be when? Would that be useful to kind of keep track of that for
So-
in-district stuff?
So the question is, would it be useful to watch a legislator's public calendar to know where they're gonna be? It would be, but they don't have them.
Oh, okay.
But most people do have a regularly scheduled like coffee, town hall kind of day. And you can call their offices and ask them when that is.
I get emails about the town hall.
Yes, yeah,
okay.
yeah. I saw, yes.
What are the best media sources that are credible and what the journalists that we should pay attention to?
Yes, so the question is, where are the best media and journalists? Kansas City Defender and the Missouri Independent are doing actual in-depth reporting and are very good for that. AP is almost always accurate. I would say Casey Star is pretty good. There's a reporter named Tori, whose last name I'm not going to remember, who does some political reporting and does a good job with that. Other than that, the chances of them getting it right is slim. And I will tell you all right now, I know if you go on my website, I talk about how I'm the Missouri Times, blah, 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 blah. Missouri Times is not a credible media outlet. It is not, it is barely a gossip rag. Sorry, Scott, but you know, it's true. However, it is watched by a lot of people. So it's useful to know how things are being framed. It's not useful for actual unbiased information. Missouri Independent is really, really doing a stand-up job when it comes to that. And it's two veteran reporters who left the Post-Dispatch and the Columbia Tribune and started their own paper specifically to do independent in-depth reporting. So if you're talking about Missouri politics, Missouri Independent is the place to go.
What was the first one, Casey?
Kansas City Defender. It is, I believe it's only online. It was started by a gentleman named Ryan Sorrell, who has background in reporting and had been up in Chicago and came back to Missouri to specifically start a investigative reporting outlet. It is mostly Kansas City local issues, but I am getting old and I know that because I met this man and I was like, so you're a child. And then he started talking about how long he'd been doing stuff and I was like, oh, so you're a slightly older child. But they're doing really, really, really good work. And when I say child, he's in his 30s, so.
Yeah.
But yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just gonna say, I know that we're looking at time here and stuff. So you've got some other really good information in here, and I really thought your funny one said process
Sorry,
document was great.
yes,
But I just wanted to, I know that there might be some questions and a few things going on. But if we could kind of hold questions for a few minutes, in order to kind of get through, and then save some time maybe at the end. And if you need a break.
Oh.
you know.
I'm good. I am sorry. Thank you for watching the time. I was not. So how do you get yourself ready to move from activist to key contact or from constituent to activist? You know, how do you do that? One, know the legislative process, know all those little steps, all those little things, conference committee reports, how do they go? What are the secret steps that aren't anywhere? Like, how do you know, how does the speaker assign bills to committee? The answer is when. So all that kind of stuff, get to know that. And I actually, you all may have seen this. This is my favorite. When people say, what's the legislative process? I always send them the bill progression checklist, which is true. And then when people say, well, I was following the bill progression checklist and it didn't do that, I showed them this. And it's a little sarcastic and forgive it, but the point here is there are all these little things, you know, you've got all this stuff that happens before it ever gets to committee, right? And then you've got all this other stuff that happens before it ever gets to the floor. And, you know, that's where the real work happens, is in between those official steps. And knowing who to talk to about each of those unofficial steps is where you start to make actual impact. So when I say that, and let's see if it will let me, I am not a Mac person. Nope, it won't. There we go. So when I say that, you know, you need to know when we start talking about horse trading, who's going to be traded with. How many, if I asked you right now, how many parties are there in Missouri? What would you say? It's 3. There are 3 power bases right now in the Missouri legislature. There's the Republican caucus, there's the Democratic caucus, and then there's the Conservative caucus, which has been over the last 4 years, getting to a point where they're not even caucusing with their Republican colleagues anymore. So when I say I'm gonna go talk to leadership about a bill, I talked to Senator JJ Rizzo, who's just down the road here. I talked to Senator Caleb Rowden, who's pro temp, and I talked to Senator Bill Eigel, who runs the Conservative Caucus, and then I talked to former Senator Jim Lemke, who's the staffer for the Conservative Caucus. But that's part of this, right? And you don't even necessarily have to know that. You don't have to know all those details to be effective. You just have to know they exist. So when you call up JJ Rizzo and he says, okay, I'm gonna have to see where everyone's at on the bill, you know what he's talking about. And you could say, excellent, who else should I be talking to about this issue? Instead of being frustrated that you feel like he brushed you off. He didn't brush you off. He was trying to give you more information. Prioritize the legislation. You guys are tracking everything. These two kind of go hand in hand. Track everything, absolutely, but don't put extra energy behind stuff that's never going to see the light of day. Make all of your talking points and stuff as early as possible, so you've got them at a minute's notice. You may have to update them, but we get 24 hours notice on hearings all the time. And if you have to try to write your testimony in that 24 hours, you're going to be in trouble. So as those bills are getting filed in December, if it's something that you think you're going to have to testify on at some point, write up something. Make an on-call list of people that are willing to travel on short notice. And this may seem like overkill, but given the fact that we know we get 24 hours notice and the fact that we know the same committees hear the bills all the time, you can say, we know we're only going to need people on Tuesdays because that's when both election hearings are, but we know we're going to need at least 2 people on call because the election hearings happened at the same time in the House and Senate. And you can't be 2 places at once. I've tried. So make a list of people who are willing. And then this is the big thing. This is how you get there, right? Set up those in-person no-ask meetings. You know, you just found out you've got a senator in your neighborhood.
And it was a social event and he was more than willing to talk to me.
Exactly. So, you know, reach out again and say, hey, it was really nice to meet you at such and such barbecue. Let's do more. Let's do more together. The bill progression checklist that I sent you is as detailed as I think it can be without totally making people's eyes glaze over. It is still 3 pages long. Yes.
So when we set up no ask meetings, do we only do that with the legislators that represent us, or do we want to go outside our own?
That's a really good question. The question was, do you only do no ask meetings with legislators that represent you? No. I would focus actually on the chairs and people on the committees that you appear in front of all the time. And League of Women Voters is lucky in that you generally have 1 committee, right? It's the elections committee in the House and Senate. Yeah.
Well,
I mean, you occasionally show up in emerging issues, occasionally education, depending, but if you're talking about IP reform, you know the committee. So I would say committees that you appear in front of regularly and sponsors of legislation that you like or dislike and leadership are the things you need to do. And it seems scary at first because you're like, they're not going to want to meet with me. But literally just call their office and say, hey, I'm Sharon Jones and I am working on this issue and I'd love to talk to the legislator about it. Or, hi, I'm Sharon Jones. I've been working on this stuff and I know that he chairs emerging issues and I'd love to go to lunch sometime and just get to know him. They may say no. They usually will say yes. They usually will say yes. Yeah, I really just wanted to make sure you all had this progression checklist more than anything. We don't have to go over it in any kind of detail. So I'm gonna, yeah,
Should you be insulted if you set up a meeting and you get there and you get the aid instead of?
I wouldn't say insulted, but I think you should say, oh, hey, I really wanted to talk to the legislator about this. Is there a reason they're not available? Can we reschedule? If it's during legislative session, the answer is usually the legislator is incredibly busy and, you know, whatever. And there are some legislators, like Mary Elizabeth Pullman comes to mind. She is weirdly shy for being someone who ran for office. And she just doesn't meet with people. So no, don't be insulted, but do ask if you can reschedule. So I'm gonna tell you a story. This is me. I used to look like that. This is Rachel Claridge, who works with me. She's a very nice lady. This is former Representative Jay Barnes. This is Jen Plassick, who you can kind of see, who is the immediate past president for the Missouri Association of Trial Attorneys. This is Jen's daughter, Sarah. Jen was down for MATA issues because we had some hearings and whatever, and Sarah was out of school. And so she was like, hey, is it cool if I bring Sarah with me? She really wants to see this stuff. After spending one day in the Capitol with us, she's decided she wants to be a doctor. So that worked. But we were sitting around talking, and Jay had a bill that would require every restaurant, every camp, and every school to have an EpiPen. And he did it because he has a kid that has a severe peanut allergy, and they had an incident where the kid ate tomato soup at a restaurant, and it turns out the tomato soup had cashews in it, and the kid had a tree nut allergy in addition to the peanut allergy or something like that. Ends up projectile vomiting all over the restaurant. Thankfully didn't have an anaphylactic moment, but I didn't know before I heard that story that you should ask, are there tree nuts in my tomato soup? Right? So Jen's not here on that. Jen's here on something completely different. But Jay comes over and is like, oh, hey, you know, I've got a hearing on my EpiPen bill. Sarah, at 10 years old, maybe, says to him, I have an EpiPen. What's your EpiPen bill do? He then crouches down and spends a half an hour talking to this little 10-year-old about peanut allergies and EpiPens and what would you do if you were at camp and you forgot to pack it and things like that. After that, every single time he has any interaction with any of the people you see behind that table, this is in Capitol Rotunda, by the way, he says, how's Sarah? When Jen needs something, she can call him and be like, hey, I had to ask you a question, but before I do, Sarah says hello. When I say you're going from, because before this day, she was an activist, right? She's the president of an association. She's a local business leader. He kind of knows who she is, but they don't have a personal relationship. After this day, they have a personal relationship. And when I am encouraging you to build those, this is what I'm talking about. Find something outside of the issue you care about to connect with them on so that you can become a key contact. And back up that new key contact status that you've worked so hard to get with having really good in-depth messaging and knowing how to get into that contact or get into that legislator's mind. So I'll stop talking now. I'm really sorry. I did not mean to go this long. Anything else online?
I had one question, I think it was answered, and I can see Elizabeth, before I do, I was gonna ask if I watched your tracking list that you did. Can you share how they can get into your tracking list?
Sure. So I use a service called GovWatch, which is a paid service. It is locally owned in Missouri and is hand managed. So it doesn't do scraping. It actually has a gentleman named Chris Galloway, his wife and their staff sit in every single hearing and every single floor session and everything and hand type in what's happening. So it's way more accurate and it's way faster updated. There's a way I can send my tracking around so that anyone who has that link can use it. And I can send it to you all again, because I think it's on the top of, it may be linked on Denise Lieberman's tracker, but I'm not sure. But either way, I always send it out at the beginning of legislative session. So if you're on the MOVPC morning calls, you'll get that link when they start bill filing. You had a question?
2 questions really quick. When you talk about taking a lunch, having lunch with a legislator. Who pays for that?
Sure.
And the second is just really quickly, could you talk about the fish fry
Yes.
in your wonderful?
Yes.
things?
So the 2 questions, one is who pays for lunch when you go out to lunch with the legislator? And the second is what is a fish fry? So usually we split the bill. I have occasionally actually had legislators buy my lunch, which is a new thing. Sometimes if it is someone that I have a really good ongoing relationship with, we'll take turns paying. But I, as a registered lobbyist, cannot buy a legislator lunch. You, as a regular constituent, absolutely can if you want to. But generally, I would say split the bill. That's safest. Fish fry is a Catholic thing. They are usually used as fundraisers for the parish. They're also used for, like, VFW will do it as a fundraiser, Democrats will do it as a fundraiser, Republicans will do it as a fundraiser. Fish fries are usually fundraisers for some cause. And you buy a ticket, you get a plate of catfish and coleslaw and whatever. Yeah, community event. Yeah.
So a comment online is no ask meetings are the same as the legislative interviews that one of our league members has been promoting for many years. And then the person says, let's get back to doing that.
Yeah.
I have a question myself. So when you're looking at issues that are on the legislative, like, agenda, right, for this session, how do you most easily find collaborators who may not be coming from it for the same reasons, like for IP, right? How do you find collaborators who may not be thinking about it the same way, but we want the same ends?
Right. How do you find collaborators on your legislative issues that may not have the same motivation? Are you talking about coalition partners or legislative?
Potentially both.
Okay, potentially both. So there's not really a good, easy way, especially if it's newer. A lot of times I will go back to similar legislation in the past and see who testified. The House is really, really good about archiving this. So you can go back to any House bill from years back and pull up their witness list and any written testimony that was submitted, because they just put the whole form out. Even on the Senate side, you can ask for, or in some cases find online, the list of testifiers. So for example, on IP reform, what I may have done is go back to past years on some of the voting rights stuff, potentially the Clean Missouri, HJR, SJRs, some of that, and see if I could find anyone who I was like, oh, I've never worked with them before. I'm going to call them and see if they've even looked at this. So finding analogous past legislation or identical past legislation is probably the easiest way to find those folks. Other than that, being tied in to, and this is also part of being a key contact in some ways, is understanding that you've got more networks than just the issue related network, right? So I am on the Planning and Zoning Commission in Columbia, which is unrelated to anything I do professionally, but civic engagement, raw. I, through that, have a lot of connections that I wouldn't otherwise. And so when I'm thinking about, here's a new bill, who do I want to talk to about it? I can also think about those connections and be like, if I called her and said, would you look at this bill? She would do it. So maybe I should.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
What are the top issues on the legislator's agenda you know will come up?
Top issues that I know will come up in 2024. Well, they have to do a budget. There is something called the FRA, the Federal Reimbursement Account, I think. Federal Reimbursement Act, which deals with hospitals getting money from the federal government. Missouri has to match it. It has to be renewed every 3 years. It is always a huge fight, even before Dr. Senator Bob Onder decided to make it about abortion. It was a huge fight. It has now become about abortion. I have a feeling this year it will also be about trans medical care.
Okay.
That will take up the bulk of time.
Do you think IP has any legs this year?
Does IP have any legs this year? At the risk of jinxing everything, I think the appetite has waned. I'll say it that way. I think especially after what happened in Ohio and the fact that we've got some of our unusual coalition partners coming out, I think there will still be a lot of people who want it. It will probably still get hearings. I don't think there will be a heavy push for it.
We have a question online, Donna.
Yes, I track the sunshine law when they try to quote reform or change it. Do you follow that? And I find it very confusing because you have to look under open records, sunshine law, and the only thing I know that passed affecting it was the highway patrol did something about charging for records, but it's any advice or help on how I can make that an easier task?
Yeah, I don't search by keyword. I search by chapter. So sunshine law is all in 610. So I just search chapter 610 and I think 610030 is maybe, if I'm remembering off the top of my head, correct? So I rarely, unless I know what the bill title, short title is, I don't type in keywords. I type in the section and chapter that I'm looking for. Which means I, instead of bill numbers, have a list of numbers in my head, like 537 is tort law, 538 is medical malpractice, 409 is venue, 115 is voting, 130 is ethics, 105 is also voting. Things like that, like.
What can we get that list of that public list?
Oh, it's just the chapter and it's, yes, I guess. So revisor.mo.gov is where our statutes are. Revisor, revisor.mo.gov. The revisor is very easy to navigate. We have one of the easiest statutes to navigate of any that I've tried. And it does have titles listed by topic area. Also, this is going back to history. Pull the bills that you've been tracking for the last couple of years. You'll start to see a commonality of what chapters those bills change. Yeah. Anything else?
Sharon, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I guess my only comment was I don't know what's right to make sure our Attorney General and Secretary of State and fiscal people don't expand their powers, but there's nothing we can really do about that. I don't think, but thank you, Sharon, so much. And she provided all the handouts.
Excellent.
And she's actually going to be back here this afternoon doing another talk to another group of people.
What's the other group, Sharon?
It's the Missouri Justice Coalition. They are showing the film called The First Step Act, which is, or it's called The First Step. It's a documentary about the First Step Act, which is a bill that deals with prison reentry and early release. And then we're doing a panel discussion after about criminal justice issues.
Anne, do you need to finish up anything or?
We just have.
Okay, do not walk away with your name tags, put them in here, and if you have not had your I joined because picture taken, Judy and I will be doing that. We're gonna add Aurora in as a future voter today, so I don't have my future voter buttons, I wish I did, but we're gonna do another one of Lydia with Aurora as future voter, but if you have not had that taken, please do, and I've got the buttons for you to wear while you do this.
Those were announcements about things that, buttons and things that are here in the room.
Yeah.
So just wanted to say again, thank you so much. I learned so much today and I can't wait. I've got all kinds of ideas about how we could put that knowledge into action. And so thank you very much. Thank you to the Zoom room and oh, yes, thank you. I do want to announce the happy hour too. There's a happy hour this afternoon. So strictly social for league members. Bring a friend if you want to bring a friend to introduce them to the league. It is at 3 o'clock at Rudy's Taqueria in Westport. Yeah, on Westport Road. So if you want to look up Rudy's Panamperia Taqueria on Westport Road, I will be there. I heard at least 4 other people in the room who said that they would be there. So be there, be square. And thank you very much. Thank you very much. And we will conclude our meeting.